welcome to episode 234 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech,
Andrew Swafford,
Nathan Smith.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be kicking off our Pam Grier series with 1972's Black Mama, White Mama. But first, let's talk about movies that we saw this week. And we have a sponsor to the show. Thank you, proud sponsor of this segment. Movies we saw this week presented by the letter H. It's like a Sesame Street episode. All of these movies that we're going to talk about have the letter H in them. We're going to kick it off with the latest Netflix.
Well, they start with the letter H.
Yeah, they don't just have
start with the letter
H in them.
I mean, the fact that it starts with it, that means it has it in it. So it's like,
yeah, but we
either
don't
way.
spend time like trying to figure out what letter is
Zach.
in all the titles.
I think we should. I think
though we can make that a recurring
I think
segment
so.
if you want.
Check it out on our Patreon
Okay.
next week, guys. Thank you. That is
The
only
vowels
for
are
our
gonna get a
Patreon
lot of
subscribers. Our first movie in the segment, sponsored by the letter H, is High Flying Bird. It's the latest from Steven Soderbergh. It's recently dropped on Netflix, and it takes place during an NBA lockout when Agent Ray Burke, played by Andre Holland, presents his rookie client with an intriguing and controversial business opportunity, and that is, screw the NBA, let's do our own thing. And you know, more words than that. It also stars Zazie Beetz and Kyle MacLachlan. Let's get into this. Nathan, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on High Flying Bird?
I have been, a fan of Soderbergh's sort of late period experiments. Even if the movies are maybe, some of them don't work for me quite as well. Like The Girlfriend Experience, is a sort of, not shot at an iPhone like this one is, but is a sort of similar digital experiment. That movie's, I don't think is amazing or anything, but I sort of appreciate what he's trying to do usually. So I was very, much looking forward to this movie, and I liked it quite a bit. It does feel... It is a weird movie. It feels very theatrical. It feels very small and very... sort of sealed off, a lot of conference rooms and hallways and apartments and backs of cars, and so it's a very sort of closed off movie, which I think is very much informed by the production of the movie. Obviously, the low budget and the sort of the constraints of this iPhone thing he's trying to do. But I think that works in the movie's favor. It's this movie about basketball, but not really like the game itself. Bill Duke's character in the movie talks about at one point the game on top of the game. This game that has been built for black athletes attempting to negotiate this sport pretty much owned by, white managers. So, it's about the game, around the game, on top of the game, inside the game. So I think having this sort of movie around basketball does sort of work with a constrained style that he's working in. It is a super talky movie, a very conversational movie, and it's really driven by dialogue more than anything else, which, I think people's mileage with that might vary. It's not...
Everybody talks so fast.
Yeah, and it's not... Because of that, I don't think it's, his most visually stunning movie, but I think it works for what the movie's trying to do, because it is a movie about labor and owning your own labor, and about athletes' ability to sort of control themselves inside the system. And it uses that, of course, as kind of a metaphor for Soderbergh's own, career-long quest to gain independence and control over his own work. But it also, genuinely has a lot to say, I think, about basketball, about sports, about race, aside from, any kind of metaphor for his career. It has a really strong screenplay, even aside from Soderbergh's direction.
Written by the playwright who did Moonlight.
Yes.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that.
So, what did you guys think? I don't know who wants to speak next, but I liked it.
Lydia, I'm curious to hear your stance on this one.
I'm not really sure what to think about it, because the actual mechanics, and there's a lot of plottiness happening, because Andre Holland he's a agent, I guess, or he represents basketball players, and he's kind of the go-between. And he spends a lot of the time trying to manipulate people, trying to manipulate his own players, trying to manipulate the president of the Players Association and like one of the owners, who's like Kyle MacLachlan. It's very Soderbergh-y in that way, because about halfway through you get a little scene that's like 48 hours earlier, and it explains to you what the fuck he's been Andre Holland's character has been doing behind the scenes. But what I've seen a lot of people flag up are the performances, and like Andre Holland, everybody gives him a bunch of shit all the time. And so his kind of just very tired reactions, but just keeps on trucking. I really enjoyed that. Like, I was able to engage with it on that level because I have no idea about the NBA.
Yeah, I sort of, I'm not super well versed in basketball either, so I did struggle with that a little bit, too. It is a kind of jargon-driven movie. Almost like it almost reminded me a little bit of something like Primer or something, where it's very stripped down image and driven by this sort of insider language.
It seemed, it wasn't romantic, but like screwball-y to me. Just like,
yes, yeah,
so fast trading of insults and like a ton of information dumps in the dialogue. And the iPhone photography only bothered me because it had like those anthropomorphic lenses that I think Tangerine used too. So like whenever there were people in the frame, it was way too close and then kind of bending outwards at the edges. And I was like, I can't look at this. I hate it.
I guess I'm in a liminal space with this movie where I really like all the names and the faces that they brought together to make this thing, especially Andre Holland. And I was mostly content to just watch them do their thing, but I didn't necessarily find them compelling as characters moving a plot along. And I don't just think it's that I'm not super tuned into basketball, because I'm very interested in this idea. I love the concept of this movie a lot. But as a dialogue-driven film, I just feel like there's a certain weightlessness to every conversation scene that just doesn't grab me. It doesn't seem like the movie's interested in making an attempt to grab me. Maybe it's just that it's shot on a phone and that changes the gravitas of the actor's presence on screen or something. But I don't know. It all just felt very small. Also because I'm watching it on Netflix as well as everybody else is. I wonder if maybe I'm just not a Soderbergh guy. His last three movies, which you were talking about, Nathan, is admiring for their experimental qualities, have just been pretty solid 3-star successes for me, but not any further than that. I'm also kind of conflicted because I agree with this movie's politics, or at least what I think are its politics. This idea of professional athletics being this other mechanism for exploitation of black bodies, the necessity of constructing some other system or restructuring the one we have now. It really shows its cards at the very, very end when we have these two characters reading a book called Revolt of the Black Athlete, which gets referred to as not the Bible, but a Bible. And I thought to myself, like, damn, I kind of just want to read that book rather than watch this movie again. But I also think this movie gets into some kind of murky territory with its politics that I don't quite know what to do with. Maybe you guys can help me work through it. Like, why is an actor like Bill Duke, who has the prestige and presence of Bill Duke, in this movie as a guy whose sole character trait is to get offended when people compare professional sports to the system of slavery? Or B, like, why is it that Netflix itself gets floated as a means of like disrupting the NBA? They use the word disrupt, and like we know that this is a buzzword for Silicon Valley inventing shit that already exists and then like not using the appropriate labor laws in order to make it happen. And I also don't know.
But that's all bullshit, right?
That was my next point. Is like I don't know how sincere that is, because that's sort of floated as a bit of misdirection to distract from the real better plan. And I wonder how Netflix feels about that, or if they are thinking about it very deeply. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on these
I
things?
don't have thoughts on that, but another question to add to all the ones you just brought up is like there's like an LGBT subtext to this film. The Players Association like has a wife and she wants to have kids with her wife, and also Andre Holland's character had a brother who was a basketball player who had to hide the fact that he was gay, and I guess he killed himself. And like I don't know what this has to do other than just like character flavorings.
I mean, I guess the cousin character could be some sort of reference to the way that black bodies are disposed of by the athletic system once they are no longer useful. But it's kind of a different situation because it's more of this person's identity was not accepted by the institution. So it doesn't really, like, the peg does not fit completely into the slot there. Nathan, what are your thoughts on all this?
I feel like Soderbergh is somebody who is probably, I mean, this is totally just me assuming and whatever, think that Soderbergh probably recognizes a lot of the flaws in the Netflix system, but I think he's just, like, happy to snatch money from them while they're, sort of unsuspectingly giving it to him. So, like, ultimately, it feels much less insidious to me than Black Mirror, the Black Mirror Bandersnatch, the Choose Your Own Adventure thing, which I went on about at great length earlier in the year, which also mentions Netflix in it, too. But because it's literally kind of developing this this software to, like, monitor consumer choices even more for Netflix, that feels a lot more, just by comparison, more insidious. I feel like I don't know, for me at least, I feel like Soderbergh is kind of pulling one over on people a little bit. And I also feel like this is, in my ideal world, like what Netflix would be putting out. Because I liked Unsane, his last movie, but I also felt something where I was like, I feel like I can't totally justify going to the movies to see this, which sounds maybe pejorative. I don't know. It's like a very watchable movie, a little thriller. But High Flying Bird has a lot more going on in terms of its thematics and its politics. Maybe it's more than just this sort of genre piece. But I also feel like it's a watchable movie. It's again, it's. This might sound like a slight, but it's not. It's sort of televisual in that it's very dialogue driven and very, scene to scene and conversationally driven. And so I find it just sort of, watchable at home. And so I do think for him it is maybe a little bit of a more minor movie, even though I did like it. But for, like, the platform and the context, I feel like it's just perfect. Like, if Netflix could release a High Flying Bird every week, that would be great. I also feel this way about the Joe Swanberg movie Win It All, which they put out 2 years ago. It's the same kind of just, like, perfect for what Netflix is, and I can just watch it whenever. Like, I don't feel an urgent need to watch it immediately. Like,
any thoughts on the Bill Duke character? What do you make of him?
I felt, to me, like, he's supposed to be this kind of reminder of, like, the legacy, of where basketball has been, somebody who is trying to remind all of these characters of the history. I really like where he's giving that speech about the NBA and how, the segregation in the NBA. And I just feel like he's just, I don't know, it's a very didactic movie. And so I feel like he's just kind of, maybe ultimately at the end of the day, a little bit of a device to sort of, like, speak for history. And Bill Duke is just, like, like you said, has such gravitas and such presence. But is also, I think, a perfect kind of casting just because he is that old. He's old, kind of elder statesman. He's been in so many movies. He's such a face and a presence. So I really like having them in that, because that's the kind of perfect Bill Duke, like, supporting role that he does so well.
Can I fill in with some knowledge of the NBA, especially the modern NBA, and kind of how this influences this movie?
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yes, please do.
All right. Well,
we didn't even talk about the documentary, interview sequences. In it.
The 30 on 30, like, interview type
Yeah.
things.
Anyway, Zach.
Yeah. Well, so Nathan, I think you make a good point about Bill Duke's character representing the kind of history of the NBA and basketball at large, because I know a lot of the push and pull in terms of people talking about modern basketball is the way that players are thinking about their impact on the game. Yeah, it's the people today, the LeBron Jameses, the Kevin Durant's, the guys like that who are the top players in the NBA today are much different than really any other generation of NBA player, because they're not as concerned with what is our legacy in terms of X team. They're more looking at their own situation and controlling their own destiny in that way, which is really revolutionary in sports, because it's the polar opposite of that in the NFL, as you can probably call up Colin Kaepernick and ask him about. And then in the MLB, it's so inflated with money that it's just a whole different animal to really dig into. But with the NBA, there is a lot of player autonomy, and they do have. I mean, it's really kind of crazy that this movie came out this week, because it feels almost like a movie that should be coming out a year from now. Because the week it came out, Anthony Davis, who is probably one of the top 3 NBA players right now, flat out said, I'm playing for the New Orleans Pelicans right now. I don't want to be playing for the New Orleans Pelicans. I want to go play somewhere else. And and it was kind of like, okay, like, what are you supposed to do there? It was kind of a something that happened a couple of years before, when a similar player, Kyrie Irving, did the same thing, but it was like, I don't want to be here, I want to go somewhere else, and the team accommodated that trade. Well, this week, the team did not accommodate Anthony Davis's request, and it became a little bit more suspicious. And that's why, Andrew, I think I kind of agree with you about the politics of this movie, because if the Anthony Davis story was High Flying Bird, it would be a really murky territory of what the Andre Holland character is, because when he requested a trade, he was aiming to go to the Los Angeles Lakers, who are, I mean, the figurehead of that team right now is LeBron James, who is the best player in the NBA currently. And the agent of LeBron James is Rich Paul, who is in charge of Clutch Sports. The agent and the agency that Anthony Davis is with is Rich Paul and Clutch Sports. So you have this whole, if High Flying Bird was the modern NBA, well, it would almost be that the Andre Holland or the Zachary Quinto character are the ones calling the shots as much, if not more, than the Kyle MacLachlan character or the Sonia Sohn character, who is the Players Association president. And so I wasn't sure what to make of the politics of this movie, because on one hand, I do agree that the players do need to have a say, because they are the ones, risking the long-term injuries, which would force them to probably only last in the NBA for a number of years before they have to call it quits, or their value is diminished because of age and injury and etc. But at the same time, it's weird, because there is a degree of agency that the agents and players have that's kind of unprecedented, and you also have this very singular mindset that players have, where it's like, I'm not necessarily interested in what I'm going to do to make the Lakers legacy great. I'm focused on what's best for me. I'm focused on what's best for Anthony Davis. And so it's kind of become this butting head between the long-term history fans of basketball and the modern NBA. And this movie gets at points of that, but at the same time it ended and I was like, okay, but I don't think you even really scratched the surface of what it is to like be a NBA player or be a basketball player, or just be an athlete in 2019, because especially in the NBA, there's so many different balls, excuse my pun, in the air.
Do you think that's because Soderbergh views it as like an allegory for cinema and working within the Netflix system as opposed to Hollywood or something like that?
Maybe. It was kind of interesting. You mentioned the documentary portions that they have. They talk to Reggie Jackson, who actually is an interesting player to talk about, because he's not like a name that people immediately associate with, oh yeah, we got to talk to Reggie Jackson for a basketball movie. But then you also have Karl Anthony Towns and Donovan Mitchell, who are two younger on the rise players, especially Donovan Mitchell, who is probably in the same situation as this character in the movie is, where he hasn't got his paycheck yet. Really, he's right now on a rookie deal that's a fixed amount. Still a good amount because he was a high draft pick, but he's working on a fixed amount. He has not got his contract yet for free agency or anything else where he's got the big bucks. And so it's interesting about them kind of talking about the system, and then Steven Soderbergh kind of talking about the Hollywood system at the same time as like these kind of means to it. And I don't know. It's such a weird, murky like conclusion it's trying to get at.
If I can say one more thing about the movie before we wrap it up, I think that one narrative I've been hearing a lot around it is, people saying like, oh, this is Soderbergh finally getting to do his Moneyball, because he was originally the one developing Moneyball before leaving it, and Bennett Miller took over, and I think Moneyball's a good movie, but and you can see kind of the Soderbergh touch in it a little bit. It does sort of seem like Soderbergh adjacent. But this, like, I think you do make a good point, Zach. I definitely agree with you that like this movie only asks like it's one question, and there's like a much bigger like Moneyball level
it's a
larger
good thesis movie.
Yeah. But I also feel like it's kind of like Andre Holland's character, he's bluffing, but he proposes this like new way of doing basketball, of doing it like boxing, one-on-one, like really expensive pay-per-view games, but we don't actually ever see that. That doesn't ever come to fruition. And so I feel like High Flying Bird is kind of the same thing. It's sort of like you say, proposing a thesis of some kind of new cinema in a new system, in a new distribution system. But it hasn't really like fulfilled on the promise. It's just sort of asking the initial question. It's not the final product. The final manifestation of the Netflix streaming model. There's something else maybe. Maybe The Irishman. The Scorsese movie, Netflix movie. I don't know. But so I feel like both in the movie and the movie itself are just asking these little questions. They're not really the full answer. So
what I want out after this conversation is an NBA podcast hosted by Zach Dennis, even though I don't watch the NBA.
Maybe some bonus episodes just on basketball.
Oh, that's Patreon exclusive.
Patreons.
No, mainly I just want to talk about NBA like basketball movies. I rented He Got Game from the library, so
you're gonna love.
So I'm
He Got
super
Game.
Pumped for that. Ray Allen's in that, so you have that NBA adjacent thing. Yeah, no, I could totally do a podcast that's just like movie and NBA. Let's move on.
We have 3 other H movies to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. High Flying Bird, that was on Netflix, as we mentioned. Andrew, I'm going to toss it over to you for your movie.
Yeah, I'm going to try and make this quick. I saw Horror Noire, which is a documentary that is now exclusive on Shudder, but it screened here in Knoxville at Central Cinema, one of the first screens in America to get it, which I thought was pretty cool. It's adapted from a book that is about Black representation in the horror genre. Here, you get the ideas of the book told to you through talking heads, famous people from the film industry that you know, directors like Jordan Peele, Ernest Dickerson, who made Bones, we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. You get actors like Keith David from Dawn of the Dead, Tony Todd from Candyman, some scholars as well. One that really stood out to me named Robin Means Coleman. I was really impressed by all of her insights in this movie. And the main gist of this is that it's offering a timeline from the beginnings of cinema up to like 2 years ago of all of the major significant moments of Black representation in horror film. It starts with a movie that is not commonly considered a horror movie, but is to audiences of color, Birth of a Nation, and it connects a lot of the later tropes back to Birth of a Nation. It goes through a bunch of different commonly discussed tropes. The black guy always dies first trope, the black fringe trope, the King Kong trope. And one of the big reasons to watch this movie is that it will put a lot of films on your radar that maybe you haven't heard of or have been meaning to get around to. So this movie made me want to go watch both of the Blackula films, which were the first horror films directed by black men. Tales from the Hood, Death by Temptation, which I know Nathan's a fan of, and this exploitation film called Sugar Hill are all now on my watch list. It also hits a bunch of the high notes that you would expect, like Night of the Living Dead, Ganja and Hess, Candyman, People on the Stairs, all that stuff. It's very entertaining, very informative. Though I left not so much thankful for the experience of watching the movie and more thankful for the list of movies that it gave me, wanting to see a list written out. Thankfully, there is now a list on Letterboxd called Horror Noir Movies Mentioned and Shown, if you want to search for that. But I also am very interested in reading the book. Like I talked about with that book at the end, A High Flying Bird, I wonder if the material is maybe better suited for a book than for a documentary, because I don't do a whole lot with the documentary form. It's just cutting back and forth between clips from movies and talking heads, people sitting in a movie theater discussing what's on screen, very much video essay style. Though I think, obviously a lot more people will see this film than would have read that book. So there's a definite net positive effect to this thing being out in the world. A couple of criticisms I have of it is, this is not necessarily a unique criticism. I've heard other people say this, but at times it feels a bit like a commercial for Get Out. As all of the movies that are mentioned, except Get Out, are both criticized and praised for various reasons. But Jordan Peele is presented as like this almost messianic figure who's like fulfilled the promises black audiences have sought for so long. He's even in his own set. He's the only person who's not in the set that all the other talking heads are talking about. He's like surrounded by all this Get Out merch. And it gives you clips from his upcoming movie Us as well. Like we're just assuming that that's going to be another like great milestone, which I guess Get Out is like a really huge milestone in black horror. Definitely don't want to take that away from it. I do wish that maybe this movie would have shined a light on some of the smaller creators who are actually interviewed here as talking heads. Like I want to know, what are their movies like? What are their plans for their future? What projects do they have that they're working on? It fortunately doesn't do the thing that I saw a lot of think pieces doing around the time that Get Out came out, which was suggesting that there was no positive representation for black people in horror before Get Out. This movie understands that things are obviously a little bit more nuanced than that. And that is the main thing the movie brings to the table. The commentary that it presents, it gives you this grand unifying theory from a whole host of voices about a really broad swath of films. This theory about how black folks have been misrepresented in this genre, as well as represented in interesting ways as well. And this is just something that doesn't get talked about too terribly often. So I think it is doing something good for the discourse around horror movies. I have a few minor quibbles about the way certain titles get handled. Like they keep showing the famous image from I Walked with a Zombie without ever mentioning that movie's name or delving into that film's politics and just kind of implying that this is a negative representation. And like you could make an argument either way, but I think that's a really interesting case. I think that Poltergeist gets completely misread, but overall, in general, what this documentary is doing, I think it's smart, it's informative, it's worth watching. Maybe not particularly ambitious with the documentary form, but I'm glad that it's out there. You can watch it on Shudder.
We're running tight on time. Lydia?
Yeah, Zach, I don't need to talk about my movie.
We need all the H's.
No.
What are our sponsors going to think?
We still have 3 H's, but we don't really need to talk about my movie. It's okay. It's okay. We'll have the third H if we talk about Lydia's movie.
We can cap it off with a nice H that is currently also on Netflix. It is a part of the Kino Lorber Pioneers of African American Cinema collection, which if you have not found on Netflix, you should. It's wonderful. They have the films kind of separated in a kind of TV episode structure where I think there's, help me Lydia, it's like 20 or 21 movies I think that are all separated on Netflix that you can watch. The first one though is from 1930, and it was kind of interesting. At the beginning they talked, they had these placards that we're talking about the writers and director James and Eloise Gist, who were black evangelists who
evangelical like circuit.
Yeah, and they made these movies and would like take them to like churches around the nation in order to show them about the sins of the nation, which we'll get into in a little bit, at least on this front. And which I think on one hand, very interesting part of movie history. You have these black directors with a predominantly
black cast and crew,
pretty much all black cast and crew, and they're making these movies, and they're decently well put together. They're not the masterpieces, but this one,
it's amateur filmmaking.
It is. It's cool. That being said, Hellbound Train. Let's just say that the evangelical filmmaking form has not really progressed since 1930. This is pretty much 1930's version of God's Not Dead. I like the Letterboxd synopsis, which is, if you listen to jazz, you will go to hell, where the scorching fires of torment are mighty and endless. And that's pretty much this movie. So you have this train, which your best friend Satan, he's the conductor of this train, and
the devil is
it's free if you give him your life and soul, and so you get on the train, and then the different cars are different sins that are befalling the black. Is it just the black people of America? I don't think it's like a general thing. It's just more the African American congregation of.
I'm sure it's like more evangelical.
Yeah, exactly, so I mean so it starts with like alcohol, and then there's gambling, and there's jazz music for some reason.
They put the gamblers and the murderers together, and I'm like, those are the same crime.
Lydia,
sure.
what did you make of this? It's only like 50 minutes long, and it's kind of a hoot because just the different sins and the way they're portrayed are kind of hilarious, but also it's like, it's not a great movie.
No,
it's very well done, but
I will say it's not a great movie because, like, thematically and morally, it's probably not that great of a movie. That seems counterintuitive, like evangelical Christianity, but some of the sins they lay out are like really funny to me. It's just like dancing is a sin.
Well, let me set the scene. You have a woman who is dancing along to a record, enjoying the music, then collapses into a chair, and she calls out to her children that she needs a book of hymns, and they run and they go get the book of hymns, and they run back. Too late. Jazz killed her.
And so
that's a scene.
So you have this like very conscripted, narrow worldview, and it's accurate, I guess. I think it's also really it's just this really fun vignette structure. I think it's also really great for like all the costumes and just kind of getting a glimpse of what a black community may have looked like in the 1930s, because it's clearly filmed in the exact same neighborhood. Like, you see the same streets, you see the same car, like one car, and kind of the same house that they're shooting in and around. But yeah, it's also got some, like, I think, nasty evangelicalness in it. One of the sins is drunkenness, and a woman gets... They're very coy, like taken advantage of, but it raped, and they're definitely blaming the woman for being drunk, and like I'm like, yeah, that's still the same. That's cool. So
they said that one of the sins is like kids playing in the road, and then one of the kids gets run over, and I was like, that's a
so
sin?
Harsh.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Although I also like that being mean to dumb animals is a sin, and I'm like, yeah, it is. Be nice to that dog.
Well, I was like, what did the animal do? Like, why is the animal dumb in this scenario? It's just a dog. Jeez.
I think they mean dumb as in can't talk.
Well, still. He's trying his best.
It's a really interesting snapshot. I don't know.
I agree, and I would recommend if you'd like the Kino Lorber Library of Congress Pioneers of African American Cinema. box set, as well as the box set of early women filmmakers, like we talked about in Young Critics last year. Those are both on Netflix, available to watch. So do that if you would like.
And like support restoration work. Because in the intertitles, they said that they found pieces of the film like across 35 different reels, and they just had to piece it together. And I'm like, that's actually impressive that they found the whole thing.
Well, it got disrupted when the Hell train was going through the the tunnel. I guess Hell has a tunnel, but you have to drive. You're driving over something, and it's like,
oh my god, they set a model train on fire at the end, and I was like, A+ special effects.
Trust me, it's not a good movie, but it's well worth your 15 minutes. Like it's super fun. There's a lot going on. Cool. We're going to take a short break. Thank you so much to our sponsors, the letter H, for sponsoring the segment. We're going to go into a short break. We'll be back talking Black Mama, White Mama after this.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Andrew Swafford with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company and because we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. Firstly, leave us a review on iTunes, preferably a positive one, because the algorithm gods tell us that reviews increase our podcast's exposure. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to cinematary@yahoo.com so that we can hear from you guys for a change. Maybe you think I'm an idiot for not liking Singing in the Rain, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie that you really want to hear our opinion on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts, and we'll read them out and respond to them on future episodes of Cinematary. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we bring to you guys every week. So to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and share with your friends and family. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 234 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be starting off our Pam Grier series with 1973's Black Mama, White Mama, which was directed by Eddie Romero from a script by H.R. Christian. The film stars Pam Grier and Margaret Markov. The film was reportedly inspired by The Defiant Ones, the 1958 film where Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis are shackled together. In this one, Grier and Markov are shackled together. Other possible titles for the movie included Women in Chains, Chained Women. They were really working with that one. Chains of Hate, and Hot, Hard, and Mean.
Hate.
One advertisement for the film included the tagline, "Chicks in chains, ... and nothing in common but the hunger of 1,000 nights without a man." Producer John Ashley recalls being unhappy with American International Productions when they wanted to change the title to Black Mama, White Mama, saying, "It was really left field. I didn't care for it. As it turned out, that was the most successful theatrical film I have ever done, in terms of hard dollars in my pocket." Which, I'm going to say that all the time now whenever I make money. Those are hard dollars in my pocket. Ashley says the film was originally called Chains of Hate, adding that he bought the treatment off of Jonathan Demme for $500.
What?
Yes, that Jonathan Demme. The film was set in an unspecified Latin American country, referred only as the island, but was shot in the Philippines for budgetary purposes. The lead actresses also reprised roles they knew very well. Pam Grier, who plays Lee Daniels, had done several tropical prison films, including The Big Dollhouse in 1971, its non-sequel follow-up The Big Birdcage in 1972, and Women in Cages in 1971. Margaret Markov had appeared in The Hot Box, which came out in 1972, which was also a Latin American prison film. Grier became seriously ill during the making of the film, saying it was a tropical disease you get from ingestion, either from food or from the virus going through your skin and water. We were in a lot of rivers, rice paddies, where there are leeches and bacteria, so it was just a matter of time before it went through a cut and into your brain, and it could kill you. She was in bed for a month with a temperature of 105. She said, I lost my hair. I couldn't see. I couldn't walk. I was dying. The doctor kind of froze me to kill the cell in my brain. Reflecting on the movie years later, Eddie Romero said, the film wasn't half bad. There are scenes in there I wasn't ashamed of, but some of those cult films, Beyond Atlantis and The Bride of Blood Island, the worst things I ever did. Hey, Pam Grier was the gamest actor I ever worked with. She was willing to do anything, jump off a cliff, whatever. I'd be talking to a stunt woman and Pam would say, oh, I can do that. Ha, she was very good. And Margaret Markov, good too. In the book Black Action Films, Plots, Critiques, Cast, and Credits for 235 theatrical and made-for-TV releases, the authors note that Black Mama, White Mama, despite its exploitative nature, passes the Bechdel test and contains themes of female empowerment. They go on to say that throughout
Despite
the film, Pam Grier is, quote, an intriguing mixture of pugnancy and femininity with a heavy dose of world-weary cynicism, despite the movie itself being somewhat listless and the strength of both women outshine most of the male characters. Women of Blaxploitation, How the Black Action Film Heroine Changed American Popular Culture notes that Black Mama, White Mama also contains elements of Black Power, as it was released during the middle of the Black Power era. The revenge that Lee Daniels gets on her former pimp is nothing short of Black Power, and, quote, 1973 marked the first time that audiences saw African-American women in non-servitude roles. The LA Times in 1973 said, so bad it's good. The Variety in 1973 said performances range from bad to mediocre. That's all I had. Those are the only reviews I could come up with. Well, it's bad. Yeah, it's range from bad to mediocre, so we got to figure out what the scale is.
Bad to mediocre or so bad it's good?
Who's to say? I don't know. All I know is that the chicks were in chains and they had nothing in common but the hunger of 1,000 nights without a man.
Lydia, you're making lots of noise during that info sheet.
Let's jump into Black Mama, White Mama, and Lydia, I'm going to kick off with you because you were making a lot of Lydia noises, which means that there were thoughts and feelings arising within you to say about the movie. So, what did you make of this film?
It's exceedingly silly. I've talked about this.
Some may say it's so bad it's good.
I don't believe in that. It's just bad. I talked about this with Andrew, like, over text, and watching a bunch of these Pam Grier movies or other exploitation films is just really solidified for me that they're not interesting by themselves, just as individual examples. It's just more interesting to study, like, in the context of a movement. So, like, you have all these women in prison films that are like, oh, lesbians and sadomasochism, and, like, we don't need a man, but there's sold two men. Yeah. I see what you're doing, and I appreciate that you want to make hard cash. But
hard cash in my pocket.
I don't know. It's trying to, like, get on a wavelength of, is this fun to watch because I know it's trash? And I have a hard time getting there. I will say, I think Pam Grier does Contempt excellently. Like, just, she's always sneering or rolling her eyes. Or she has great reaction shots, I think, to just whatever bullshit's happening.
That's true. I told Andrew before we did the podcast that Pam Grier does not take any shit ever.
That's going to be a recurring theme, I think.
I feel like, too. Andrew, what did you make of the movie?
Let's see. I've never seen a woman in prison movie or a women in prison movie before, which I guess is a subgenre of the exploitation world. I think Carol Clover mentions it in her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, that genre being like the most formulaic of the formulaic. Like, of all the exploitation subgenres, this is the one that curbs the most to hitting all of the tropes and making sure it's ticking all the boxes as it goes along. And I haven't seen a ton of exploitation films. There are, in general, there are a lot of people who really live and die for these things. But I think I don't like exploitation films in general. Like, for the first 20, 30 minutes, it is like intriguingly problematic, which I guess is the best you can hope for in an exploitation film. But then after a certain point, it just becomes very boring. And that's been my experience with most exploitation cinema. I also want to throw out that, just as fun fact trivia, looking through the Letterboxd reviews of Black Mama, White Mama, a lot of the people who have watched and logged this movie on Letterboxd, feel the need to comment on how attractive they find the leads, but B, a lot of them watched it for the Todd Gaines Xanax and Strippers movie challenge, which just worth bringing up, I think. We can get into.
God,
you're welcome.
Friend of the show.
I guess we can get into. We can get into specifics of like what this is doing and how it works and whether or not it's actually dealing with any of the politics it says it is. But my general reaction is I was super bored.
Spoiler, no.
And it was like less than 90 minutes. Which is insane. But yeah.
It's a very long, less than 90-minute movie also. I think the first thing we can kind of get into in terms of that though is
can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
I feel like you guys are maybe underselling a little bit, and maybe this is just like totally my interest in production stuff, but this movie does have some like interesting things going on. First off, just doing a little bit of research, I was intrigued to find that the director, Eddie Romero, this Filipino filmmaker who has a very extensive body of work, most of which is not in English but is in Tagalog, and he just seemed to have this weird detour in the 60s and 70s where he made these English language exploitation films, but his stuff otherwise looks to be like more art house fare almost, and so I'm kind of like I didn't know this going in, but watching the movie I was like intrigued by it because pretty much a lot of the extras and a lot of the side characters are Filipino, and I just would love to read, I don't know, what exactly has been written about this film, but I would love to read some more extensive, production history about this American-Filipino co-production. I don't know, I'm just like, how did this come into being? I'm sure it was just, some situation of, tax credit, labor pool, and,
Well, there's a whole subgenre of women in prison films that are films set in the Philippines because of the tax breaks for it on the Wikipedia page.
In Pam Grier's autobiography, she says her first film that she did sorry, I'm just going to keep going. API, she was there for 6 weeks, and then they were like, hey, we have the money to make another one. You want to stay for another 6 weeks? And we'll just do the exact same thing again. So I think how cheap it was to make films in the Philippines.
Yeah, it seems like they were doing a lot of these it was weird because that intrigued me also when they were talking about the location shooting, and I was trying to find information about why they were shooting there. But I couldn't find anything about other than it was cheaper to shoot there, why they were deciding to film all these movies there. It also seemed like just such a left field location to be like, all right, we're gonna shoot all of these movies in the Philippines. It's not like that's like an easy trek.
I think they were also able to use Filipino cast and crew, or not cast, but behind the scenes stuff. They could get the local filmmakers to work for cheaper too. Because Pam Grier talked about in her autobiography, just talking to everyone and trying to learn just what people did on a film set. So
yeah, it did, and it does sort of sometimes integrate the kind of local culture in interesting ways. I don't know a ton about the Philippines and Filipino culture, but they have at one point there's a character driving those one of those decorated buses with all kinds of colors and ribbons and stuff. I don't know. There's a name for those vans. I don't know what it is. I just am familiar with it because there's this really great Filipino movie that was produced by Werner Herzog called Perfumed Nightmare, which is about a guy who drives one of those vans. And I don't know, it's just interesting to see, like, you know, this movie, which is probably could have been set anywhere, to see how it interacts with, like, the place in which it's made, just out of necessity. So that was sort of like the most intriguing thing to me about this movie. I do agree that after a while it gets pretty boring, because the initial setup is really interesting, having a sex worker and this revolutionary chained together, like, you know, forced to make an alliance. And there's even one part where, like, one of the prison wardens is like a terrorist and a hooker. You guys will have a lot to talk about. But then it, like, at a certain point it's not even really about them.
No. It spends way more time with the white dudes trying to chase them down.
Yeah. And I will say
those guys.
Just to from an exploitation standpoint, I guess I think a lot of maybe people's interest in this movie is not just Pam Grier, but also Sid Haig, who plays the, like, cowboy guy. Yeah, he's so much fun. Like, and
it's really funny.
And I see kind of, like, even though I think I'm, you know, maybe more into exploitation than you are, Andrew, but I do also have, you know, my mileage varies a lot. But I guess I do get why maybe some people, you know, it's just you follow these, like, character actors and weird personalities like Sid Haig, who just is, like, wearing ridiculous, colorful cowboy costumes and really chewing up the scenery. He's most familiar to me from Rob Zombie's movies. He's really amazing in House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. But yeah, he's been in so many movies, and apparently he was originally offered the role of Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction, but turned it down. So he was given, you know, a part in Jackie Brown, I guess, to, like, because he realized his mistake. But I don't know, he has a very interesting, long career, like, you know, Pam Grier, just somebody who was in a lot of things. But it is disappointing, like, because they're both very compelling screen presences, but they're not really, like, together. Like, they don't really do a lot in the movie together. And so
I think they do late.
Yeah, but it's like they're both, you know, Sid and Pam are such strong presences where I'm like, put them together, you know, in this movie, and it would be more interesting. But I don't know what it's doing.
And
I think
we should probably switch our focus a little bit to Pam Grier. I mean, I feel like maybe it was a little irresponsible to start this conversation as, like, here are my thoughts on exploitation in general, when Pam Grier as an actress seems to be somebody who was able to find her niche working specifically in not just exploitation but other forms of genre cinema, whether that's, you know, horror movies or sci-fi movies, as we'll see later, in addition to some of the more, like, blaxploitation films and the Women in Prison film that we're talking about today. And this is, when we kind of planned out this series, one of the intentions behind pairing Pam Grier with Jackie Chan are, like, let's look at two stars of genre cinema from different parts of the world who kind of have different levels of autonomy over their own work. Jackie
they do
Chan,
their own stunts.
Yeah, Jackie Chan being somebody who directs a lot of his own movies. Pam Grier seems to me, you know, I haven't seen a ton of her films. I'm going to be exploring them through the series, but my hypothesis is that she's very much hampered by the constraints that she is required to work within. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how she's working within them in this movie.
Yeah, and that's a good place to kind of start with this movie, because a lot of the some of the reviews, both mainly contemporary things that I found, were applauding it as this kind of feminist movie because it has these two female characters that are beating up their oppressors, which I feel like has become kind of an easy way for someone to justify a movie as feminist or you know, something, or I guess
kick the guy in the nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
It's empowering.
So so I kind of want, let's talk a little bit about that aspect of this movie, because I agree that the you don't get too much of the kind of give and take between the two lead characters, because we are cutting away to all these other parts that are way less engaging than just these two women chained together trying to escape this all of these people trying to capture them. But my takeaway was not, oh, this is a feminist movie because it's these two women kicking guys and beating them up. I never got and it seems like that label is just, it seems to be trying to be justified just because it has two lead characters that are women.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, maybe you could pin a sort of feminist reading on it, not just because they're kicking ass and beating up men just as well as any dude, but like two women who like learn to work together and kind of find common ground. But again, a lot of that is an excuse to put them in just a shirt, and the white lady just like takes her underwear off and like on a dog for some reason. So I think, so when you're desperate for some sort of representation, you can do a feminist reading of almost anything. I think it's important to take into account intent, especially the filmmaker's intent. And that they're so far from their mind.
And you can do a feminist reading of it. You can do a feminist reading of it if you're not taking into account the craft and the gaze of the movie. Like, this is an object lesson in how you have to separate what the characters are doing versus how the camera is watching them do it. So like, yeah, maybe they're beating up dudes, but they're doing it in a really titillating way. We're making sure the camera's low enough to where you can see their ass the whole time. And this, I mean, that's, yeah, go ahead.
It has kind of a weird perspective on sex work that, again, I don't think is a feminist intent, but Pam Grier's character's like, I'm a revolutionary. Since I started fucking for money and I was like, okay, I guess.
What were you going to say a minute ago, Nathan?
What was I going to say? Oh, honestly, I don't remember what I was going to say, so let's keep it moving.
What are your thoughts on like the revolutionary angle this movie?
I think that's more exploitation stuff.
It's not really there, you know. I was hoping that there might be I don't know, some way that you could like read it, you know, you have this theory-driven revolutionary and this working woman, you know, cooperating and forming some kind of alliance. But again, I feel like honestly, even beyond like, you know, the movie does look at its characters in a certain way, but it could maybe rectify that if it spent more time with them. It's just at a certain point in this movie, it's not about either the black mama or the white mama. It's, you know, about these just guys in rooms of men. And I just, you know, sort of got lost in that plot. So I feel like the movie could maybe like make up for what it does and for its sort of leering gaze, if it just spent more time with its characters. But it is, yeah, you know, I feel like any sort of political angle represented by the revolutionary character is pretty hollow. I mean, it has that sort of trope stock character of the revolutionary who's like actually, you know, born of rich parents and like whatever, and is just playing dress up or something, which is sort of, you know, I feel like in American movies how leftist revolutionary characters are always written off. So it just, you know, sort of subscribes very closely to those tropes. It is interesting that you know, the story co-written by Jonathan Demme, who started his career with a woman in prison film, Caged Heat, which is really like, I think, the only other one in the subgenre that I've seen, which I feel like is a you know, doesn't have Pam Grier in it, but is like a better made movie. But you don't have the presence of Pam Grier. But again, it's like kind of disappointing to me that she's not really like quite the focus of the movie, even though she's obviously like much more of a compelling kind of actor than like I feel like the other women in the movie.
Presence. It does do one better on the Defiant ones, though, because Pam Grier gets the fuck off the island.
Yeah.
She's like, okay, have fun with your revolution. I'm not going to stay and like chain my fate to yours, which I know is Baldwin's critique of the Defiant ones.
I was curious about that. I knew he had an opinion on it. Is this movie too early in Pam Grier's career for her to demand that focus on her character, or is she at this point still kind of considered somebody who's going to be a tertiary role? Which is crazy to say because she's like one of the two leads here. But I wonder if she had the star power in '73.
No, I don't think so. This was before Coffee and Foxy Brown. So.
I know she considered her work on the films in the Philippines a learning experience. Like, I was just trying to figure out how to act and figure out how to be in front of the camera. So even she kind of not discounts, because the way it reads in her autobiography is like she's very grateful for the opportunity, and so she's not burning bridges there, obviously. But she's like, I was still figuring out how to be an actress. But I think even then you see, like I was talking about at the very top, I mean, she's got a really, really, really good presence.
Yeah, she just has
So anytime she's in a scene, I'm looking at her.
She just has, like you said, that kind of white hot, like, fury in her. And she just is constantly pushing back and even kind of just, like, demanding your attention a little bit. I mean, it's easy maybe to, like, she is the most famous person here, so like we're already, and we're watching the movie for her, so we're already kind of looking for her. But I do feel like she just sort of naturally like draws the focus of the movie much more than anyone else who's in prison alongside her.
Like, you can tell she's going to be a star. Like, she has, not in this movie, but there's a presence about her, and you're like, she could carry a film.
Yeah. And she's demanding the attention of the other actors on screen with her, and in a way that is not necessarily just on the page. Like, she is always trying to meet their gaze eye to eye, even when they are not looking at her. Like, she is always staring them right in the face. And she has that great line delivery, and I also couldn't help but notice that, like, and this is a script thing, that her character kind of exists to cuss a whole lot. Like, almost every line out of her mouth is like includes bitch or fuck or ass or something like that. My ass is something she says many times, and I couldn't help but compare her to like Sam Jackson in that way of like she's this great like weapon for like the dissemination of like profanity in this really over the top way. But yeah, that's mostly what I got on Grier's performance in this. Anything else from you, Zach? We haven't heard much from you.
Well, I think that's a lot of what you all are saying about her presence is what's frustrating about the movie, because, I mean, going back to the point we made earlier, the fact that it's constantly kind of steering away from their plot line to the other plot lines, you're just kind of like, why are you doing that when the most compelling part of the movie is right here? And so I think that's kind of what starts to draw your interest away, because they keep pulling you. You almost forget that this movie's about the two lead characters, because it keeps pulling you to other plot lines that aren't nearly as interesting. And I think that's the biggest issue with the movie, is that it doesn't recognize that, oh no, this whole duo is the reason you're watching this movie. Right. It's not anything else.
It does sort of have that problem where I feel like a lot of, or maybe not a lot, but many exploitation films have this problem where it has this sort of initial hook to like get you in for the first 20-30 minutes, and then it's like, let's become about something entirely different because we don't actually have enough money to make the movie that we sold you.
Like, it's exploitation films are not just exploitation because they have a bunch of TNA in them. They're also exploitation because they sell you on a concept that they're not actually going to follow through on.
But they had a budget for explosives. The ending, I was like,
sure
you're just blowing up the whole
Also,
this is where all the money went.
I did think at the end of the movie, like when they're trying to get off the island, it is a kind of interesting. There's like that weird still photography as one of the women is like bleeding and dying. Like it's like you have these still images and it almost looks like La Jetée or something, where it's just these like freeze frames as she's
like cut in really quickly.
Yeah, as she's like getting shot with, or like
dropped frames. And the squibs are going. Yeah. It's like what's happening here?
Or like kind of, it sort of looks like the end of Night of the Living Dead a little bit. It's like a rare moment of visual flair in a movie that's pretty by the numbers, like.
But it's like visual flair employed for a character that the movie did not allow us to spend enough time to like give a shit that she's dying. Right. It's just like, well, that's artistic, I guess.
Well, that was what I was hoping to get more of out of like the two of them, because you have the Pam Grier character who is this sex worker, but seems like somebody who has had to scrape for every dollar or whatever she's tried to get in order to survive. And then you have the Margaret Markov character who Pam Grier's character makes allusion to, that she's just this kind of rich girl who's come here to be part of this revolutionary. I feel like having that that dynamic between somebody who's had to work the black character who's had to work for everything in order to get where she is, and then the white character who is coming here to play revolutionary for a while, I felt like you could earn some mileage off of that whole exploring that to an extent. But again,
right, you could tell a genuinely like revolutionary story with like theory and praxis coming together, forming an alliance.
They're just wearing.
But no, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is a like better remake to be made of this movie. I don't know.
I don't want to see a self-serious remake of anything.
Well, I don't know. Like, absolutely, has there been a revisionist women in prison movie? Like, is that a genre that has
I actually don't know.
I don't like. I can't think of anything.
Don't know.
I mean, it's kind of
well, all the like prison films are just still exploitative.
Right.
Orange is the New Black is not that.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised that Quentin Tarantino hasn't, tried to dip his toes into that.
Oh, he's already started writing it the minute you said that. So
he's listening.
I think a problem with like trying to reclaim some of these genre things is just it's still kind of shitty sexist premise. Yeah. Even like women-directed rape revenge films, I'm still suspicious.
Right. It still has, owes a debt to like that genre that is initially compromised. Like, and it's never going to be able to get away from what the original genre was, even if it tries to make it, more appealing and to a 2019 audience.
I'm looking at the Women in Prison Wikipedia page, and there's a section called Prison Film Producers about where the genre is in recent years. And essentially, it's just like actually porn now. Like there are just porn sites for women in prison films. So like, for example, you could go to, and this is not a sponsor, cagedtushy.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other direction like prison exploitation films go
could be
is like Brawl in Cell Block 99. Like, okay, it's in a prison.
Yeah. Vince Vaughn in prison films.
Yeah, and there is like a little bit later in the decade, a sort of blaxploitation movie series that I'm a big fan of is the Penitentiary series by Jamal Fanaka, who was kind of a member of the LA Rebellion movement, but worked in like very clear genre lines and worked in sort of more commercial territory than most of those filmmakers. Those movies are about like a boxer in prison.
Yeah, but like they are very dude in prison makes one type of movie, and women in prison make another type of movie that basically becomes like a BDSM fantasy.
Right, but I will say that the one thing about the penitentiary movies that I do really like, which this is kind of, I think, true with like most prison movies, but I think Penitentiary does it in a little bit more interesting way. It does sort of like acknowledge the kind of the presence of multiple sexualities and like gender identities within kind of the prison
but without being
environment.
titillating to the straight male viewer, which is what the lesbianism is here.
Right, but it has sort of like it has sort of like characters who seem to be trans within it, which is not really something that is frequently included in these movies. But like you say, it's not trying to be titillating. It's not just for this pleasure, I guess.
It's for the pleasure of that one guard who really Norman Bates that whole...
Yeah,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
going to say earlier, that speaking
yeah.
of characters who get tossed off pretty early but have visual flair given to them, I thought that was the most like cinematic sequence of the movie. Like, even though it's the one that's the most male-gazy, like the fact that it's cutting back and forth but like gradually making the cuts more frequent to the point where it becomes
Well,
like a
I
strobe
couldn't-
effect by the end. It was kind of cool.
Well, what it became was it widened from, okay, this is a POV shot of the prison warden to this is just a shot for the audience. And so, like, collapsing any sort of distance between the audience and that voyeuristic character moment. I was like, okay. I mean, I don't think this is on purpose, but okay.
Yeah. The only part where I felt like they were doing a thing with
it's-
cinema.
Not directed by Brian De Palma. You know, that's
Yeah.
It's not directed by anyone who's like trying to own up to their fetish.
They're just indulging in it.
Yeah. Dipping the toes into the dirtiness.
Any final thoughts on Black Mama, White Mama, or thoughts on kind of the inception of the Pam Grier series?
It will be interesting because you like we said, you know, this feels like a sort of Star is Born, like, you know, emerging presence. It will be interesting to see like how that kind of gets distilled as she moves into leading roles, and as it is allowed to take center stage. Because that is really interesting that she's had this like career, which I feel like is the kind of the career of so many exploitation actors, where you start, you know, in these supporting roles and you have a time kind of the main billing, and then you have decades of like very tiny, weird little roles. So I'm interested to see that sort of,
But she became iconic.
to see that sort of like rise and fall, kind of like into these from the margins to the center and kind of back out again. I'm interested to see that evolution continue.
It's interesting to see, you know, having just wrapped up the Jackie Chan series, how his arc is almost the reverse of that, where he starts kind of at the top of his game and having the most authorial autonomy he's going to have. And then as he becomes more iconic, he gets placed into a larger system where he actually has less control in the American, like Hollywood studio system and these international productions. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Pam Grier navigates all this moving forward.
Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on
Anything
Facebook
else?
at facebook.com/Cinematary, and on Twitter at @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we will be bringing on a guest for the first time in a very long while. Mia Mask is going to join us. We're going to be doing the double feature of Coffee from 1974 and Foxy Brown from 1975.
Both Jack Hill.
Some Jack Hill films. We've also, one note, we have switched out one of the movies in the series. We initially were going to talk about Escape from LA. Lydia was like, no, she's hardly in it. And we were like, okay, Lydia, we gotcha. We're going to switch it out and do another John Carpenter film that features Pam Grier and talk about Ghosts of Mars 2001, which my comment upon seeing a movie still is, Nathan definitely suggested this movie.
Yeah, it is John Carpenter's like new metal masterpiece. The evil monster in it looks kind of like Marilyn Manson / Blair Witch, like freaky vibes. I don't know. It's something else. Like, I don't know if it's completely good. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but it is definitely something else. So I'm excited to talk about it.
As long as
And it has
Pam
Ice
Grier's
Cube in it,
for
too.
more than 3 scenes.
Yeah, she's in it for like a third of the movie.
That's fine.
So
Better than LA.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're not going to take a short break. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.